Fantastic. So if everybody's all set, we'll get started. We ready?
Ready.
Okay.
Ready.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Watershed Wednesday webinars. My name is Jennifer Harville, and I'm a Natural Resources Specialist at the Tug Hill Commission in Watertown. Welcome to all of you, and especially if this is your first time attending the Black River Watershed Conference. And we are so looking forward to the day when we can hold this conference in person again, right? But for now, let's make the best of these remote meetings. The webinar is being recorded and will be shared via our live YouTube channel and on our website. Pay attention to those follow-up links that come from Zoom, because they do have links in the emails that tell you where to go to find our recordings and presentations. For now, you're all muted, but please use the chat for questions and comments. Your colleagues at the Tug Hill Commission and the Lewis, Herkimer, Hamilton, Jefferson, and Oneida County Soil and Water Conservation Districts and the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation Region 6 have been hard at work putting this series together for you. And we hope you find these webinars both informative and interesting. Joining me today is my co-coordinator in this series, Nichelle Swisher, and she is the district manager from the Lewis County Soil and Water Conservation District. Nichelle, go ahead, take it from here.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. Welcome, everyone. I first want to welcome everyone to the kickoff of our webinar series. Our first webinar in this series will bring together two efforts that seem very different, but we hope you'll learn both about each effort and how they can be related and mutually beneficial. Our first topic is a study of the extension of the Black River Recreational Trail. We're in a feedback gathering stage, so please speak up during the presentation. Use the chat button to both ask questions and to provide your thoughts and ideas about the trail extension. Jeff Erda from the City of Watertown is ready to introduce you to the project and speakers, and we would like each of the four speakers today to say a few words about themselves before they get started in their part of the presentation. And Jeff, you can take it away.
Thank you, Nichelle. Well, I'm only going to be talking for a few moments because my main function here is to introduce this study and then introduce the speakers who will be talking to you about it. But as Nichelle said, my name is Jeff Erda, and I'm a planner with the City of Watertown. But I'm not really wearing my city hat for this presentation. I'm wearing my MPO hat, and I'll give you a brief introduction as to what that means and where this study is coming from. So MPO stands for Metropolitan Planning Organization, and in this area, our MPO is called the Watertown-Jefferson County Area Transportation Council, WJCTC for short. And I represent the city on the MPO along with a few other city employees. And the MPO is an equal collaboration between the City of Watertown, Jefferson County, and New York State Department of Transportation. And it was established after the 2010 census, or as a result of the 2010 census, breaking a given population threshold. We are one of 15 MPOs in New York State. So there are plenty of other MPOs just like us who take a regional metropolitan approach to planning and are equal collaborations between city, county, DOT. And the real benefit to the MPO is it allows us to work across municipal boundaries on studies, plans, and projects that have regional impacts and have stakeholders that cross municipal boundaries. And this study is just such an example. There's really two prongs to it, and Katie and Keith will each be presenting on one aspect of this planning study. As you can gather from the title, it will talk about extending the Black River Trail to Fort Drum and exploring different feasibilities and different ways for getting the trail connected to Post. But it will also serve as a region-wide bike ped connectivity study looking for gaps in our bicycle and pedestrian network as a region and how to fill in those gaps. So part of any planning study like this is public outreach. And we recently reached out to the Tug Hill Commission as a stakeholder. And in addition to a lot of great information, they were very generous to offer us this time slot in this conference. So we appreciate that very much. And as Nichelle said, this presentation itself is outreach too. We really want to hear from everybody on the call today, and we want to hear your thoughts and your feedback and your ideas. So we've really budgeted about 15 minutes for the presentation, and then the rest of it is hearing from you. And I think Keith will probably plug this at the end, but we also have a virtual public meeting for this next Tuesday, May 18th. So if you'd like to attend that, please do, or if you know anyone that you think would be interested in this, please let them know about that opportunity. But with that, I am going to step aside and let Katie take the stage.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jeff. So my name's Katie Darcy. I work with the firm Barton and LaJudas, and we are assisting the MPO in putting together this bike and ped connectivity study, and we're really excited about having the chance to present here and kind of getting the word out on what we're doing and hopefully getting some good feedback. So like Jeff said, we're going to try to keep the presentation relatively brief so that we can get some feedback. So if you have any additional questions after this, feel free to reach out to us. We're more than happy to give you some additional information. So our short agenda here is I'm just going to give a brief overview of what the project is and what we're looking to get out of it. And then I will be kind of going through the MPO wide analysis with looking at regional connectivity across the MPO area and going through just kind of what we've gone through so far in terms of that. And then Keith will be taking over to talk a little bit more about the Black River Trail extension to Fort Drum, the alternatives that we've developed thus far, and some of the design components associated with those. So without further ado, well, this is our project team, and I think we've kind of already went through this. We've got Jeff, myself, and Keith on the call. We also are working with Highland Planning, a firm in Rochester that specializes in public engagement, and Christopher is actually on the call as well. So if we have any engagement-specific related questions, he can help us out with that. So as Jeff alluded to, the primary purpose of this study is to identify key significant gaps in existing bike and ped networks throughout the region. Also provide for context-sensitive solutions for future investment in active transportation, such as bike lanes, sidewalks, shared use paths, roadway crossings, really anything that has to do with getting people out biking and walking more in the area. And then lastly, just a general enhancing connectivity and accessibility for transportation users of all types. So as we mentioned, we're working with Highland Planning, and we've done some preliminary public outreach to date. That has included developing a public engagement plan, doing some preliminary stakeholder interviews, as we mentioned, the Tug Hill Commission being one of those, and I think this screenshot is from that conversation. We've also talked to Fort Drum, the Village of Black River, parks, and a few other local businesses and entities that are pertinent to our study. We've also done some preliminary outreach to property owners along the alternative trail extensions that we have developed thus far. Those are still in the process of being developed, so property ownership may change, but we just wanted to get in front of it and make sure people are aware of we're doing this study and to get people on board right from the get-go. And then lastly, we've also developed a comment form and a stakeholder database if people are interested in learning more and getting updates about when there's opportunity for public comment or deliverables that they can be reviewing. They will be notified via e-blast. So these are kind of the overarching vision and goals of the study. I'm not going to read through the vision statements for the purpose of time, but we are looking to help support aging in place in the region, help promote access to the natural resources in the region, particularly the Black River, working towards sustainability goals of getting more people out of their single occupancy vehicles and onto bikes or on their feet. Also helping to foster community and economic development in the region, creating like a regional destination with the Black River Trail. We're also hoping to improve safety with roadway crossings and off-road facilities so that people who might not be comfortable using their bikes or walking along a roadway can access that type of transportation or exercise in a more comfortable way. Trying to promote healthy lifestyle choices, championing accessibility for those maybe who aren't able to use vehicles, and generally just creating a unique destination and a vibrant community that people will enjoy living and visiting. So we are currently through our existing conditions phase. We've looked at a couple of pieces of data that we think are relevant, including general roadway characteristics such as the average traffic volumes, speed, ownership of roadways, how people are commuting in the county. You can see in this infographic on the bottom right of this slide, unsurprisingly, the majority of people in the county are driving alone to work or carpooling. However, there is about 6% of people who are walking, which is promising and also indicative that people are interested in having these types of facilities. But there's very limited biking to work and pretty limited public transit, which the goal of this study will be hopefully that we can entice a few more people to make those decisions by providing attractive and accessible amenities and facilities for that type of commute. And so we also looked at existing parks and trails and existing sidewalk and bicycle lane networks. The map on this page, the city has a great database of what exists out there and what they're looking to do in the future. So that's been very helpful for us in terms of trying to draw lines between existing connections or existing facilities and think of future connections between those facilities. So as I mentioned, we've done some stakeholder outreach at this point, and this is kind of a general summary of some of the key opportunities and issues that we're seeing based on those conversations. So you can see here, people are saying that a longer Black River Trail might promote tourism and draw visitors to the region to use the trail. Also, that they think it's advantageous to create a connection between the city of Watertown and Fort Drum, particularly their new museum that is being relocated. There's also an economic development component of this. Creating the trail going directly through the village of Black River could help benefit their downtown and kind of spur some additional investment in there as people are traversing through the village on the trail. And lastly, the partnerships can make new trails and extensions viable. Some of the issues, which are things that we aren't surprised by, funding and resources obviously is always a constraint. There's property ownership considerations that we are taking into account. We're also considering putting some of our alternatives are considering putting part of the trail on road, which comes into conflict with vehicular traffic on Route 3, and that's a pretty significant roadway within the region. So that's something to consider, making sure whatever we are proposing is safe and comfortable for using. And then also we're looking at utilizing some existing informal pathways that exist along the Black River Trail, and some of the conflicts of the existing use and creating a formalized trail, something that we're taking into consideration. And then generally just safety around the Black River. So based on our existing conditions and also the conversations we're having, we're kind of envisioning these being the 5 key categories of needs that we're seeing region-wide in the MPO. And this includes promoting access to natural resources, again, particularly the Black River, creating linkages between what exists to create kind of a seamless pedestrian or bicyclist network throughout the region, so that if you do want to do these long distance traveling on bike or on foot, that's feasible and accessible. Fostering connections between activity centers, those being the city of Watertown is an obvious one, the villages, any major commercial centers, and Fort Drum. Also providing safe connections between residential areas and schools. We've seen we've identified some preliminary gaps in sidewalk networks between schools and local neighborhoods, and we think that that's a great focus area for the MPO to consider. And then lastly, developing programs and policies that support future multimodal investment, whether that be something like a bike to work program, or program where you encourage people to bike to work for one day to just try it out, or more of a regulatory thing, making sure your zoning codes or your city codes are in line with something, with the vision of creating a multimodal friendly environment. So that's kind of where we're at with the MPO wide assessment. I guess maybe you want to take a pause for any questions. I don't know if there's any that's popped up in the chat thus far. And if not, we will transition to the Black River Trail extension.
Nothing yet in the chat.
Okay, great. So I'm gonna send it over to Keith, who's gonna talk about the extension.
All right. Thank you, Katie. Thanks, everybody. My name is Keith Ewald, a landscape architect and planner with Barton and LaJudas as well, working with Jeff and others at the MPO. As Jeff said, the MPO is really an organization in Watertown's case, made up of staff from the city, the county, and the New York State DOT, Region 7 office. So we're being charged to, as Katie mentioned, to, again, study sort of a regional wide connectivity network. And one of the tasks that has come up as well is to basically identify a feasible route from the existing eastern terminus of the Black River Trail, which is just south. And you go to the next slide, Katie, which is just south of the Route 3 corridor in the Village of Black River, or just outside the Village of Black River, and find a feasible way to connect the Black River Trail to Fort Drum. So again, the primary alternative of this particular study, which has already been sort of defined as a priority project by the MPO, through prior studies as a prime candidate for future funding opportunities. And again, the need to, again, just service the base with connectivity to and from, the city of Watertown and enjoy recreational resources and things like that. So this particular study, which is a little more drilled down in scale, because what we're doing is identifying alternatives, and we're getting down to specific property owners and constructability issues. Again, to what's the most feasible way to construct the next phase of the Black River Trail in the region. So Katie, you can go to the next slide. So a quick overview of the alternatives that we are looking at the moment. So I guess just to take a step back, we're still in the sort of data collection phase of this component of the study. Again, reaching out to willing landowners, hopefully, that will help with some of the right-of-way constraints. Again, the priority for the Black River Trail extension would be to be off-road, enjoying the scenic resources that the Black River offers in the region, and other points from the city eastward to the Fort Drum base. Basically, the alternatives that we're looking at start, like I said, at the existing trailhead south of Route 3, just outside the Village of Black River, and extend east northeast to a gate at the base, which is in Great Bend. So right now we have, I guess, 4 or 5 alternatives. There's sort of a sub alternatives that we're looking at. The priority, again, like I said, is to stay along the river if we can, or at least stay off road. What you see here is sort of a combination of all of that. So Kate, if you want to, I'll just kind of quickly roll through each alternative so everybody's got maybe a little bit of context. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry. Part of the process where we're in here. So again, like I said, we have a public meeting coming up, which Jeff had mentioned earlier. As Katie mentioned, we're kind of sort of coming out of the existing conditions phase, identifying what the primary needs are, which is kind of where we're at right now, which is a good point to hold public meetings and take stakeholder input and the input of those property owners that may or may not be contacted by us to gauge their willingness to perhaps provide some easements for trail construction and all that good stuff. And then really what we're kind of going to be moving forward with here the next weeks and months is identifying the right-of-way needs and the constraints, talking to property owners again. We will kind of come out with another public meeting to basically present the alternatives and the recommendations that come out of both the region-wide connectivity study and also the specific extension of the Black River Trail. And then ultimately what we're going to provide to the MPO is a report identifying our findings, recommendations, funding opportunities, and things like that. So next slide, Katie. So, all of these alternatives, again, start at the same point and end at the same point. So the deviation between them is how we get from A to B here. This alternative one, primarily, we try to follow the riverbank to the extent that we can, trying to minimize impacts to resources like wetlands and floodplains. And to date, so far, we have determined that the impacts are very benign. There's not a lot of wetlands and floodplains in this region, primarily because of, I guess, the elevation changes between the river and where the embankments are adjacent to that. Next one, Katie. So the second alternative is kind of a combination of on-road and off-road facilities, again, primarily off-road. This recommendation, Jeff, is more or less kind of the route that the city has been studying for the last couple of years. And again, it's kind of a combination of some of the other alternatives, but again, it's, like I said, it's kind of, on road for portions where we need to be, and then jumping off road and utilizing, again, some of the land resources hopefully available to us to build the trail in the future. So it's kind of a both, southern side of the river and the north side of the river, utilizing existing footpaths that are out there today and utility corridors. Next. Third alternative is, ideally we want to be, again, along the riverbed if we can. We have sort of a fallback plan using Maple Street in the Village of Black River, where there are some existing facilities, and I'll kind of talk a little bit about that more in a couple slides. But again, it's where, there's sidewalks there that are available. There is a plan by the village to eventually extend sidewalks to some newer developments that are on the eastern end of Maple Street. And again, with both of the sort of sub-alternatives here for alternative 3 ultimately all wind up at a connection to Phelps Mills to a National Grid utility corridor, which is sort of that eastern half on the northern side of the river that links up to the gate at the base in Great Bend. So next, and then our sort of final alternative here is really kind of the least desirable, I would say, which is an on-road facility that would be shared with vehicles and bikes and pedestrians. And part of the analysis of that alternative would be to, again, looking at right-of-way availability within the state route. So the DOT obviously would have, while they're part of our MPO, would be sort of the guiding approving agency for a facility on their state route. Some of the things that we would look at is, do we have the right-of-way available to have sort of a separated side path, which is not sharing the road, or the pavement with vehicles? It would be separated with some vertical sort of barriers, separating from the road to the extent that we can. But again, not the most ideal situation, but certainly an alternative that gets us to, the base. Next. So just kind of roll through some of the design considerations that we'll look at as part of the study. Obviously, the trail will be ADA, it has to be designed to meet ADA standards. We use things like the AASHTO book for bikes and peds, and because of the role of the DOT in the region, and State Route 3 being a state highway, or a state roadway, I should say, we often refer to the Highway Design Manual in Chapter 17 and 18 are their bikes and pedestrian design standards for those. The little graphic here is just kind of a tidbit, we kind of throw around. Basically, without getting into it, what it suggests is most people would be much more amenable and using these facilities if they were off-road, not sharing the road with vehicles to the extent that we can. Next. So what we have here is just a collection of photos of the existing Black River Trail in the region. As you can see, it is a primarily off-road facility. There are small segments that are on road. Again, those are typically used as transition pieces to get, from one off-road segment to another. And our goal is to find the most feasible alternative to continue this type of trail design to the extent that we can. Again, from the existing trailhead south of Route 3 to the gate at Fort Drum. Next, Katie. So just kind of go through what some of these, sort of look like from a design standpoint. Again, your off-road trail. Typically what we would like to do is have, in order to accommodate bikes and peds and bi-directional movement, we would like a 10-foot paved trail. So the whole trail is going to be paved to the extent that we can do that. Again, it helps with ADA and movability, active transportation, and all that good stuff. Includes all users, more or less. Next. So in an instance where we might have to share the road or use existing road networks to, again, transition part of the off-road network to another off-road segment. An example of that would be along Maple Street in the Village of Black River, where you can see they have sidewalks on both sides, which is nice for pedestrians. They are separated from the roadway. The trick here would be how do we include bikes in a situation like this? And it's really more of a reapportioning the pavement, the existing pavement roadway width to hopefully accommodate bikes on road, because nobody likes to be on a sidewalk with a bicyclist coming at you. Next. And then again, this goes back to sort of our least desirable situation where we're sharing a road shoulder with vehicles. Obviously not the safest situation, but there are design standards and regulations in place to facilitate an on-road shared facility, and this is basically an example of that. So next, Katie. Some of the other things that we'll be looking at, obviously some of the safety factors because of the nature of the routing of the trail and road crossings and things like that are of primary importance. How do we cross a road or interface with a road? There's design standards in place to guide how we build those, and this is an example of that. So it's one of many of the design considerations that we're looking at as we continue the study. So next, Katie. Another critical component of these trail pieces are the termini that how do people get on them? So typically what we have to have, if there is a road crossing, people sometimes need to drive to these. You can't really access the trail 100% by foot. So, critical design element to these would be, suitable trailhead facilities where people can park, leave their vehicles for a while and get on a trail and get from, maybe someplace near the base to the city of Watertown, continuous and back. And these are just sort of existing kind of design concepts that we've generated to date, which are one of these is at Garrison Drive in Great Bend Road, which is just outside the entrance to Fort Drum in Great Bend. And the other one is kind of a new sort of trailhead that would be built on sort of both of these are on each end of the National Grid corridor that we hope to be able to use, which is an existing pathway in the region that people are using, recreationally at the moment. And our thought was, if we could build and formalize this, get access from the National Grid, formalize that facility and have things like trailheads and proper signage and, elements like that to, again, provide proper safety and, conveyance as needed for these types of facilities. Next, Katie. So, as I think Katie said, and I'll just kind of reiterate here, we're, I would say, not quite midway through this study, but approaching that. And, we're going to continue to assess from the regional-wide standpoint, just gaps in the overall bike, ped, active transportation network. One of the critical elements, obviously, is going to be looking at right-of-way. In order to be off-road, there are some encumbrances that obviously will happen with private property. In many cases with these types of projects, those discussions with property owners are obviously critical. They all will not be willing to have a public trail facility anywhere across their property, but hopefully, if there's land big enough, it's sort of an accoutrement they're willing to deal with. It's basically an easement that we'd be looking for, which they'll still own. Obviously, the public will just have access to it. So, of course, inherently there, we're going to have additional conversations with property owners as we continue to evaluate the alternatives. Part of that assessment is also constructability. Are there, what kind of wall, are there walls needed? Again, floodplains, wetlands, if there are wetland impacts, how do we mitigate those? Again, that's another design consideration. Our safety analyses will continue. How do we interface with roadways and other safety factors? There will be another public meeting. We've talked about getting out and sort of having a walk, checking out the trail, meeting outdoors. If we can, again, it's all sort of subject to protocols and requirements for COVID. And then ultimately what we plan to deliver is a report to the MPO that summarizes basically all of the findings and recommendations for the regional-wide connectivity study, but also more of an analysis to foster the extension from of the Black River Trail to Fort Drum. And next. So again, shameless plug here. We do have a meeting, as Jeff said, May 18th, which is next Tuesday. It will be in a very similar format as we're having here today. We'll have a little more detail in terms of the presentation that we're delivering here today. But again, these are ways that you can reach out to us in the future. And Christopher Dunn with Highland Planning is kind of leading our public outreach efforts. You can certainly reach out to him or Katie or myself or Jeff at any point in time. And with that, I guess I will open it up to any questions, or we can move on to the next presentation.
Go ahead, Jeff.
All right, so I know there was one question in the chat about 10 minutes ago. Are there plans to extend the Black River Trail beyond Waterworks Park, parentheses, further into the city? And yes, it's not a part of this study per se, but the city does have its own conceptual ideas about how to bring the Black River Trail further west. As you know, at Waterworks Park, once you get much west of that, there's a trail that parallels Huntington Street and then ends just across from Colorado, where you kind of run out of real estate on the riverside. And then there's a crosswalk that brings you across Huntington Street to the city sidewalk network. And that's about as far as you can go on the south side of the river. However, on the north side of the river, the city owns an abandoned rail bed that runs from Sewell's Island all the way to the city line with the town of Pamelia. And adjacent to this city-owned abandoned rail bed, there is a paper street. In other words, it's city right-of-way, but no street was ever paved there, that connects to Marble Street Park, which is directly across the river from Waterworks Park. So the potential exists there to use all of this city-owned land to construct a trail from Marble Street Park all the way to essentially Factory Square on the mainland side, the south mainland side of Sewell's Island. And then you could use the Eastern Boulevard Bridge crosswalks to connect between those two parks that would essentially take the trail westbound all the way to Sewell's Island and Factory Square. That's a little bit separate from this study, but it's certainly something that the city has in concept as a vision that it's considering. And the fact that the city owns all of the land needed is certainly a bonus. So hopefully that answers that question.
Thanks, Jeff. There's two more questions. One was from Emily, and then one from Chris, who asks, who will maintain the trail in the future? I think it's important just to answer to who maintains it now, who maintains it in the future.
I can answer the second half of that question regarding maintenance. The maintenance right now is New York State Parks. They maintain the majority of the trail, in essence, from the where you dismount under the Eastern Boulevard Bridge until the eastern terminus. From that dismount point west through Waterworks Park, the city maintains it. And we reached that agreement with State Parks when we did the most recent extension. We were co-applicants on a Transportation Alternatives Program grant where they were 70% and we were 30%. And then that maintenance piece was built into that request. But the overwhelming majority is State Parks for maintenance.
Yeah, and part of the study, which we have not gotten to yet, but it's obviously maintenance and operations of the trail is a critical component for, preservation of, the investments that the state and other public agencies make in these facilities. As Jeff said, State Parks maintains a good portion of the trail system at this point in time. It has not been defined who would maintain and operate the trail in the future, but it's certainly something that we'll be discussing with obviously the MPO and other stakeholders as needed. And hopefully we'll have a clear answer on that as the study goes along here.
Okay, thanks, Keith. And then finally from Emily. Hi, Emily. Will the trail work also minimize or mitigate deforestation along the river to conserve riparian buffers that benefit water quality?
Yeah. So that's another critical, design criteria and part of one of our evaluation criteria for all the alternatives. Most of the alternatives are, I would say, most of the segments of all the alternatives are on areas that are either existing utility corridors or footpaths that are currently being used. So segments of, or I guess long runs of off-road areas that are currently cleared. And that's obviously an ideal situation for trail construction, minimizes costs and obviously impacts to, as you said, riparian buffers and species and things like that.
Thank you. All right, thank you. Are there any more questions or concerns or comments? Oh, here we got one from Maria Garcia. Is there any consideration to having bikes and pedestrians share the same sidewalk, 6-inch height adjacent but separate from each other in vehicular traffic? Oh, I see. Yeah.
We haven't gotten to looking into that yet. It's something that we certainly would look at. Our recommendation, typically, if we're going to put bikes and peds on the same pathway, we would typically recommend an 8-foot minimum width there, which tends to get a little tricky when you're on sort of a sidewalk type facility, say, for example, in the Village of Black River. But one of the things that we do want to look at is sort of a separated side path, for any segment that's on any road. One of the first things we look at is a separated side path. So if we can separate a facility from the vehicular pavement section, even if it's a 5-foot separation, and then have basically a minimum 8-foot path that runs parallel to that roadway, that's a nice condition to have. In the event that we can't have bikes and peds on the same facility, again, like in the Village of Black River, it's nice to have pedestrians sort of separated from vehicular traffic on their own sidewalks, and bikes in that condition would share the road. And a lot of things that we hear too when we do these studies is, avid bicyclists are probably going to use the road anyway. They just prefer to ride with traffic, and that's just the way they are. However, it's the sort of other user groups, such as families with small kids, like we're seeing in this photo, certainly would rather, if kids have bikes, certainly rather be separated from traffic. So yeah, we're looking at that. We're looking at ways to do that.
Excellent. Are there any other questions that we can address or any other comments? I'm just dropping a link in the chat there. That is a Zoom link to register for the public meeting next, you said next Wednesday?
Next Tuesday.
Next Tuesday, the 18th, right?
Yeah.
If anybody's
and
interested.
Feel free to forward that link too to anyone that any guests on this call think might be interested.
Okay, will do. All right. So if there's no further questions or comments, we can bring up our next speaker. And it's Chris Rentschler from UBuffalo.
Hey, thank you for the invitation to the Tug Hill Commission. And also I want to thank the previous presenters about the very interesting project. As you introduced from a local scale, now we move up to a watershed scale. Obviously, you would be impacted if something is changing in the watershed, and in the region in the lower Great Lakes, changes that happen with climate or any kind of other changes, land use, land cover changes or so forth, they impact our region. So the presentation that I'm going to give is about this Outsteps research network. My name is Chris Rentschler. I'm a professor in geography at the University of Buffalo. I work with GIS and with environmental modeling and with a whole lot of other different disciplines, not only at our universities, but also at universities in the region, as you can see here, and a whole lot of different stakeholders to look at how we can collaborate and work on regional scale challenges that we face. So this is a community platform for stakeholders and universities in the lower Great Lakes, and it's called Outsteps. So at first I want to do an acknowledgement that we are in the land territories of the Seneca Nation, Haudenosaunee Six Nations Confederacy, covered by the Dish with the One Spoon Treaty of Peace and Friendship, as well as the 1794 Treaty of Canandaigua. It's important to not only acknowledge that, but also give Indigenous participants the opportunity to have a welcome in each of our activities. As you can see here, we're dealing with Lake Erie and Lake Ontario and the watersheds that lead into the lower Great Lakes. And the approach is here to look at sustainability and community resilience. And I will talk about this as a part of the presentation. Again, the Haudenosaunee territory that covers a major section of that is of a special interest and to work with the Indigenous population. And having said that, I want to highlight that there is particularly a collaboration with the Seneca, as well as with the Mohawk Nation and Akwesasne across the into Canada. But that means we're not only reaching out to the Haudenosaunee nations, but also to anybody that lives in the region. The idea is to address foundational questions, to build models and concepts, and to involve stakeholder and rights holder so that we as academics are tighter connected to the community, listen to the challenges that they face, and also working with them on potential solutions. We got a workshop funded by the National Science Foundation in 2019. And that was a proposal that says we combine the Sustainable Development Goals from the UN that are listed here, as well as the People's Resilience Framework Dimension that is research that come out of my research group at the University of Buffalo, where we look at different functions that are going on in landscapes. So People's is basically an abbreviation, population and demographics, environmental ecosystem services, organized governmental services, physical infrastructure, lifestyle and community competence, economic development, and socio-cultural capital. All of these different kind of systems can or are impacted by an extreme event, and there are ripple effects throughout these other systems. And if we face challenges that are like defined through the Sustainable Development Goals, number 13, for example, is climate action, but there are lots of others, then the question is, this is a transdisciplinary approach that we have to take. So how do we work together? And we basically propose that we can work together in certain stretches and landscapes and coastlines, for example, and major water courseways like the Black River would have the main channel and just a bicycle path. It's just suggested. It's basically we had to look at it from an integrated way and from a more holistic way. So, now it's time to do some polling. So there should be some sort of an animation coming up here. Oh, the animation got stuck, but we have the first poll. And the idea is that what UN sustainability goals are you mostly concerned about in the Black River watershed? So you have got a whole list there, and those are, I think, the first 10 sustainability goals. And you can just pick and select here which one are you most concerned about? You can have multiple. If you're with all, then go ahead. So we've got one response so far. Please go ahead and vote. You're not concerned. Everything is fine. That's great. You know, I would love to move there, by the way, if that's the case. So now, okay, we're getting more responses. That's great. A little bit more time here, maybe 8 seconds. So more concerns. Clean water, sanitation, that's big issue here. Okay, I think we can end the polling and look at that. So clean water and sanitation is the major one. And I'm not sure if we can scroll down and see what the other ones are at the bottom there. I only see the top ones, but okay. So
each
now
person
we go
needs to, each person can scroll up and down in their window, I believe.
Oh, okay. I can see it now. Great. I can also scroll. Thank you. Good. So let's go to the next question. So water, clean, sanitation. That's the one. So now we go to the next poll. And now these resilience dimensions. So when you think about it, which people resilience dimension are you mostly familiar with? Pick one or more. So let's say if you're a civil engineer, for example, you would say physical infrastructure. That's my thing. If you're into the environment, ecosystem services, maybe that's it. If you're working with communities, maybe social cultural capital, maybe there are religious or cultural groups that you are most familiar with. Just pick anything. Seem to be a lot of people here having environmental ecosystem services, organized governmental. Nobody, we don't have physical infrastructure people here. I think the bicycle path is a physical infrastructure, like a roadway and so forth. So pick more, pick multiple if you want to. Leave it up for another 10 seconds or so. So it looks like mostly organized governmental services and environmental ecosystem services is there. So it's a kind of like the group here that we are with, and there's some were not picked. So interesting. So let's go and continue to the last question. And the last question is now, I think we need to go on. Another one. Yeah. So which people's resilience dimension are you least familiar with, but find it essential to solve any of the UN sustainability goals? So if you see any of the challenge that is on there, what do you think? Whom do you need to work with? So somebody wants to work with environmental ecosystem services. There are people here, so that would be a great match. So you definitely, this person will definitely find some expertise here. Now, lifestyle and community competence. Yes, that's an important one, and often we lack these kind of people to interact with. Social, cultural, economic development, lifestyle, community competence. That's usually a one. It's interesting that this comes up. More votes. We still have got about 13 people that haven't said anything. So pick here, pick one which we are really most concerned about, where you say, if we're not solving this, we will take some time to solve this problem. Okay, so it's the last three: lifestyle, community competence, economic development, social cultural capital. Now, those are just two in each category. It's just a snapshot, not really high number and so forth, but kind of like gives you an idea, how do we match these different aspects where we have got expertise and where we have got interest and where we have got the need to go and work with people that we maybe is not our expertise, but this would help the solution. So we can close the poll and continue with the presentation. That was the time for polling. Now, the idea is that with whomever we work together, that we kind of like see how do we map the sustainability goals in these functional systems? Where are the interconnection? Where are the win-win opportunities and so forth? So, and you can kind of like see that the sustainable development goals and people's really match, major categories like food and shelter, community health, clean water and energy, and economic health, and also the rural ecosystem and urban ecosystem category here, as well as the spiritual one, how we collaborate and create partnerships. Interestingly enough, with the Seneca Nation and the Akwesasne, of the Mohawk Nation, have similar kind of patterns when they, interact with within their community. And to reach them and also learn from them about more holistic views is something that we embrace as a part of this project. And another idea is that we work trans-boundary. And the UN has got these biosphere reserves. Maybe you heard about that. The Adirondacks, for example, is a biosphere reserve park, but also the Thousand Islands area and Frontenac is one. And then we have got Niagara, the Niagara Escarpment and Longshore Point, for example, in Canada. It's close by. And there are concerns about climate change, about loss of biodiversity, and so on, nitrogen cycle alteration, pollution, and so forth. And Outsteps is basically looking at transects along major rivers, and as well as the coastlines, and we call that dynamic integrated regional ecosystem community transects. And within that transects, we basically have got multiple partners that we put a proposal forward for the National Science Foundation. Tomorrow is our big defense, so we were going for a big, interesting exercise, and if we pass that, then we'll get 5 years of funding, and hopefully that works out. But with these partners, we work at various scales that go from smaller scales, like we've seen sections of the Black River watershed here in their first presentation, dealing with town, community, and municipality things, and also dealing with county and state regulations or aspects that are important. So we chose these partnerships various scales so that we can work and know what's happening within the region. So people, should not only hear in the Black River watershed, they should also hear it in other parts of the lower Great Lakes, how you sustainably and resilient design bicycle path that supports the community and some of the sustainability goals, as well as the other aspects of regions like the biosphere reserves will make a lot of sense. So our research idea is sort of a trampoline. We bounce between two sections. The network is basically our Outsteps network. And when you are on the mat, you kind of like reference it within your discipline. And when you're up in the air, you've got this transdisciplinary perspective to see more holistic. And when you come down, you adjust, and then you go up and down, and you basically move forward. And believe it or not, the National Science Foundation really loved our trampoline idea. And when you translate that into academic question, then is, in what way do policies and practices in our region work to support and undermine just sustainability and resilience? So just sustainability is that it is just not only particular parts of the population, but also for everybody. So the research team 1 is about network science and the co-production of knowledge. Then we have got the modeling of regional systems of sustainability and resilience. And we have got the planning for just sustainability and resilience in the lower Great Lakes. So that's basically our trampoline bouncing between 1 and 2. And when you are in the air, you basically look for this interaction and for the planning of that, what you're doing, and the outreach of the university. Here's an example. This is Mike Gates, with whom I work since more than 10 years. Comes to my classes and talks about what's going on in the Seneca Nation. He's not a natural resources manager. He's an emergency manager, and he has to deal with all kinds of aspects. As you can see, that the erosion that is taking place within the Seneca Nation along the Cattaraugus Creek is a problem. And then there's also seasonal ice jam situations and so forth. So this research team network, research team model, and research team planning go very well along this. And the Seneca Nation has got experts in either of those fields, but they also would like to reach out to a larger network of experts, not only within universities or in the region, but also with other communities that are around the lower Great Lakes, so that we can help each other and assist each other. In our workshops, we create this firm foundation with diverse teams, so all the voices can be heard. The cultural knowledge is an education that we're looking forward. And there are summer institutes that we plan and propose where there's transdisciplinary research taking place, and then we can communicate through annual meetings, to community activities and gatherings like this one here, seminars, dialogue series about Indigenous practices and Indigenous science, wisdom, and knowledge. And then there's community outreach, and that there are network-wide communication so that you can, ask, I'm a part of this network, I'm looking for this kind of expert, and people will say, hey, I have got this expertise, you have got that interest, so we have a common goal and we can collaborate. So these cultural perspectives help us really to cross boundaries and to have practices that are not necessarily there in academia, and how to exchange with community partners. We all can learn from each other. And that's why it is so interesting here to have different people working together on common interests. So this approach is used as a model for non-Indigenous communities and engagement as well. So we learn from these Indigenous activities. Now, in terms of our organizational chart of the outsteps.org, is that there's a managing committee that's that basically supports the network director. I am that at the moment. And we have got an administration for the day-to-day network operation. There is an information and data management that needs to be handled. And obviously with NSF, we would get a nice boost of these kind of activities. And then there are these research activities, education activities, and network development that plays a role here. That includes students, graduate students, undergraduate students, postdocs, internships, so forth. And then we've got faculty across this network. And condition is basically when you participate, you have basically an office hour. And that means you donate 1 hour of your time per week to be available for anybody in the network to discuss things. So that could be an anthropologist, it could be a geologist, it could be a planner, it could be a lawyer, whatnot. But if you're a member, then you would basically have access to this network. We have got a stakeholder participation group that is really engaging with us, gives us feedback, and works with us on these issues, as well as we propose to have external evaluator and external advisory board. To some extent, our stakeholder participation group is this external evaluator group at the moment, because these are not only academics that are working together. We have got all kinds of activities around the year, and I just want to highlight a couple of them. So we've got weekly meetings, we've got monthly managing committee meetings, we've got quarterly stakeholder council meetings that this is a proposal, but we already presented the professional meetings, as well as, like you can see here in the center, participation in community partner events. And that's basically what we're doing here right now. So this is an invitation for all that are interested in working with us, to engage with members in these activities, to grow the network, not only in reality, but also in our minds, so that we can think differently at different scales, and then expand the network across borders. This is to motivate and assist other regional outstep networks in the US and also around the globe. And that was important for the National Science Foundation to consider that for funding, so that this can be replicated somewhere else. And here you can see some pictures here from our first workshop where we had the lower Great Lakes map, and we basically had the sustainability goals with those different cups. And we had the People's Resilience Framework as threats, as you can see here on this tray here, connecting these, and we understood how we are connected in the lower Great Lakes. So thank you very much for your attention, and we invite you to join the Outsteps group so I can answer questions right now. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to say good luck with your reverse site visit tomorrow, right?
Yes.
You've been in a lot of preparation for that, and we thank you, Chris. If there's any questions or comments, go ahead and drop them in the chat. I'd like to say thank you to Jeff, to Katie, Keith, and Chris for kicking off our Watershed Wednesday webinar series, and thank you to all of you for joining and for caring about the watershed. We hope you'll join us for upcoming webinars, And I'll just drop this link in the chat and see if Nichelle would like to make any closing comments.
Hi, Jennifer. Thank you. And thank you, Chris. Thank you, everybody, for presenting today. We appreciate it. Were there any final questions that we had for Chris?
Chris or the city or the planners at Barton and LaJudas?
We'll give it a second. And while we're waiting, I was just going to ask Chris, could you roll us through what are the next steps? You have this presentation, you're applying for funding, but in the process, what are you working on and what could we do to try and be part of this network?
Yeah, so at the moment, it's mostly about that, local partners, or regional partners say that here's something that we are really interested in, but we don't have any kind of support. Do you have any students that would love to work on something like this? So we basically connect these students to work with stakeholders and then work on their challenges from a management perspective, from integrated environmental management, for example. I teach that in my class. And then there are GIS and modeling classes where then there's more a technical aspect. So for example, optimal route routing and where solar panel locations, these kind of things. And then it's almost like a pilot study. And based on that, then there could be proposals written and there could be funding for the partner as well as for the students to do certain activities. We had about, in this last couple of months, 6 students that got funded opportunities to work with stakeholders. And that was already quite a help for them to know that they already got training while they were doing the university training that they didn't pay for. So there's a lot of win-win opportunities. And, it would be great if we can promote the bicycle path idea, within the network and then basically have others to join in and, listen to you, not only because they're locally interested, because they also want to do things in other parts of the region.
Thank you. I think it could be useful in terms of working with Soil and Waters. We are mostly all leads for our counties in water quality management. And then we're like the point person that can then expand out to planning and lake associations and private landowners. And, we have internships with interested college students. So I think this would be a great network. And I just wanted to, if Jen didn't say, she did put a link to the Outsteps in the chat for anybody that wants to copy and paste that.
Yeah, and the biggest challenge is really to link urban and rural issues because often those are sustainability in urban areas. That's kind of like mostly what you hear, but to really link them and to have collaborations along coastlines, for example, or along rivers. I loved it, in the presentation before, the different administrations and different organizations that had to work together. And those are all challenges. And we don't want to educate students at the university just to know one part of it. And then they go out and then they realize, oh, no, now I had to deal with stakeholders. They never taught us that. So, we hope that there is just a better communication between academics, stakeholders, practitioners, and indigenous people in the region.
Okay, thank you. Stay tuned, everyone. And good luck on your presentation, Chris.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and Emily asked a question there, what I can see there. So, what expertise can Black River watershed communities and stakeholders connect with to help support the questions? I mean, it's if there is anything that worked out where you say like this is best management practices, we developed that, then that's exactly what we want to exchange. If we shouldn't reinvent the wheel. Not every community has to go through the same kind of pain to figure out what those best management practices are. And I think if we have an exchange for that, we all do much better and being more efficient and effective in what we are doing.
Excellent. Very good. So we're just past 4 o'clock. We did pretty good. We kept it in an hour. That was a lot of information. And again, thank you. Thank you for your attention. Thanks for preparing for the presentation today, and we hope to see you at future Wednesdays.
Thanks for
Thank
having
you.
us, Jennifer.
All right.